With that, there we go, recording in progress. So good day, colleagues. Today we are going to talk about Excel and creating lovely dashboards. A relatively simple example today. And as I share my screen, we'll see a couple of things in that dashboard. And so those of you on the phone should now be seeing my, my Excel screen. And there's actually only two worksheets in this particular example. And the first is sort of the input area. And a couple of points I'll make about this example is this is a case where many people are putting in data. And so there are various areas in the spreadsheet where people on the team would enter updated data each month. And so we actually have responsible parties listed to the right of each of these dashboard metrics for the folks who need to put things in. This is a redacted and salted and anonymized example. So nothing in here is real. I've changed all the numbers and all the labels. So we will occasionally see some math things that don't entirely make sense, but just set that aside. This is here for an example. And secondly, for the people responsible, in previous versions, I've actually built logic so that as each month progresses, if somebody hasn't entered their data by a certain day, their name would be highlighted. And it makes it really easy when we go over on the dashboard side of things to know who hasn't put in their data. And I imagine you folks have worked on teams where occasionally someone gets a bit distracted and doesn't get their data entered by whatever date this needs to be available. So this is sort of just a background data entry sheet. If your dashboard were simple enough, you could actually combine both of these things on the same worksheet in Excel. This case, there's enough data that we probably don't want to do that. And it's a good Excel technique, I think, often to separate out things like your input areas from processing areas from display areas. And in this case, all we have is input and display. But again, just as a general piece of Excel hygiene or guidance. The second thing I point out then is generally on this sheet, just to make it easy for the users, where they'd enter data each month has a different cell highlighting than things that are static. So for example, this skews, this hypothetical goal of 0.66, it's constant each month, doesn't need to be changed. So we don't highlight it, it's just sort of in the background. If this were a really complex sheet used by lots of people, or you're concerned about data getting overwritten, we could do things like lock various areas of the input sheet. But in this case, it's not really necessary. And so these are all just sort of fictional and made up, but it gives an example of a sheet that shows a few past years, 2019, 2021, as well as current year to date. And as you can see, I'm actually filled in data all the way through October, just again for display purposes. So this is the input side of things, rudimentary, and then we'll toggle over to the dashboard side of things. And I'll zoom in a second, but the initial goal for this was to be something where it could be printed each month on a single piece of paper for those who didn't want to have a laptop at a meeting. And technically, you could actually publish this and view it on your phone. It'd be a bit small, but it's useful. So I'm going to zoom in a bit now just to make this somewhat more legible. And we'll look at a few of these. And of course, the actual details of all of this are completely fabricated. So don't get hung up on what's being shown specifically. But a few things I would like to point out about dashboarding that I've found effective and my clients have asked for. One, you'll see a lot of dashboards that contain things like gauges and widgets and just really fancy, colorful dashboards. But the problem with that is often it sort of obscures the thing you care about, which is often some sort of progress compared to some sort of goal. And so I like this very rudimentary chart in the upper left because it's real easy to see what the goal is. It's easy to see where this client stands relative to that goal. And we even do a little bit of extra work in our labels to suggest, okay, here's where we want to be each month compared to that goal. If we really wanted to, we could add in some additional coloring. So the chart area above the goal might be green. If we fall below the goal, it could be red, but that's perhaps more fancy than we'd actually need in this case. So here it's nice and simple. I love a chart that looks like this, right? It's instantly, you can apprehend immediately what it means. To me, all good charts kind of look like gauges in a cockpit on an airplane, where they display only the critical information and there's not a lot of extra info. And the second chart, again, would be sort of similar, very, very straightforward in terms of what is desired for a goal and what's being delivered in terms of results. You'll also notice a lack of colors, which makes it boring, but makes it very, very easy to apprehend how things are going and whether you're falling short or above the goals, that sort of things. Here's a somewhat more complex example. And again, all fabricated data, but you can add a lot more than just the basic things that Excel provides. And so here I'm charting more than a couple of things, but it's pretty simple to see what's going on and where we stand relative to goal. And this one too, even though it looks a little more complex, we're just graphing a few different series. So here we've got past year series, and we gray those out because they're not as critical in terms of what the client would want to discuss in a meeting. And then current year stuff might be in black. And again, relative to a goal. A couple of tricks I'll point out here is we use different colors to sort of highlight what's more critical black versus what's less critical gray. And in addition, we start to introduce some additional text. And if you know anything about Excel and preparing charts, you'll say, Excel's charting capabilities don't actually allow this little comment here. And in some cases, and there's another example over here, in some cases, you want to add a little bit of additional detail. So if somebody's looking at this, they can always remember some critical fact. And so this is actually a second thing I'd like to show you about charting, which is you can make chart elements transparent. And so in this case, I'm just making the background transparent, which allows me, and I'll drag this chart out of the way. Whoops, I'll drag this chart out of the way. Here we've got just a simple piece of text that I stuck in here. And because the chart is transparent, it appears behind it. So if I wanted to put a chart element here, I can move it around anywhere I want, and it allows for me to lay out a dashboard and then overlay or underlay some additional data under it. And in this case, it's simply just a box with some text, but there's nothing to prevent us from actually using, say, a formula or a cell or additional chart elements that work in a similar fashion. And I'll show a much more complex example in just a moment. Here's another, as we scroll back up, this headcount FTE chart, where we see some elements we've seen before. And when I move the chart out of the way, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Something you'll notice is that in addition to the normal labels, there's actually some additional data present for each of these months. So for February, there's some dashboard element that's 16%. And this is kind of a cool thing you might not know you can do in Excel. With Excel, with your series labels or your value labels, you don't have to limit yourself to just what Excel gives you. These are actually the results of formulas. And so if I highlight this and click on chart design and go over into select data, we can actually see my input labels come from this area, D45 over on the input sheet. So if we go over to D45 on the input sheet, here are those labels. And what we'll notice is these things are not just simple labels like January or February, they're actually formulas. And I'll just drag this down a little bit so you can see. And so here I'm just concatenating a few pieces of data, and we won't go into detail on how to do that other than I'm assembling data points from various places in the chart. So I'm grabbing the text January, I'm adding a space to it. There's actually a special character here that allows you to essentially introduce a new line, like a carriage return, and it allows you to control the data display. And I'm also grabbing whatever values in the cell G48, I'm multiplying it by 100, and I'm adding this last bit of text %. And so when we go back and see what that looks like on the dashboard, we're able to cram a little bit more data into that label other than just the text February or like hard coding 16%. We don't want to hard code it. We want to have a formula, because that way each month as the data gets updated, the results in the chart can change. And it could be the result of complex calculations if that's something we really wanted. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. And I'd highly recommend if you do charting a lot, it's a useful way, again, to cram more info into something like this, which is a dashboard where you have somewhat limited real estate. The next thing I'm going to show you is a little bit more complex, but again, we're taking advantage of a couple of things I just showed you, which is one, putting in, changing parts of a chart to transparent. And so this, for those of you who do Excel charts, is not something that Excel does easily. And my formatting is a bit off because I just repurposed an old chart here, but you'll see we've actually got 3 bar charts and three line charts. And so for each of these, for the black bar, we can see there's a black goal, so we can assess how this metric is doing relative to its goals. And we can do the same for the blue bar and the green bar. It's pretty easy once you dig in to sort of see what's going on. But how do we do that? Because Excel won't natively let us do that. So again, we're taking advantage of the fact that Excel allows us, to set chart elements transparent. So here we've got, I'm dragging these things off, and I apologize, things wiggled around a bit. So here's the first chart, and you can see there's just 2 elements present, but the back is transparent. And actually, let me just drag this over. You can see it's transparent, so you can see the things that are behind it. And what's behind it could be text, but it could also be additional charts. And so I'll just grab a couple of more of these and tease them apart. And we can see here's chart elements where it's just a goal. Here's an additional chart, and we start to drag these things off, a second goal and another chart. And so we just layer these rascals on top of each other. It takes a bit of work to set things up and get the values to line up. Oops, sorry, just drug off another one. But we can just see this is actually comprised, that fairly complex chart was comprised of many, many charts, all transparent, all with transparent backgrounds and elements, and all laid atop of one another. And here too, these are actually elements from a chart. The only thing that's present and not set to transparent is just a single piece of text that I'm grabbing off the input sheet. And this is useful because then every single month, as something is updated in this chart, and it could be text, it could be a calculation, or both, these things all lay on top of each other and all are dynamically updated. And if I just Control Z to put all these things back together, we can sort of see what that result looks like once we layer all these things on top of each other. So that's sort of how this dashboard got put together. Again, relatively simple elements in terms of what Excel can do. We're not using, gizmos, and you can do really fancy, cute things with gauges, but often I don't find they actually produce anything useful in terms of data analysis. It's more just, it makes people feel good, but I don't know that they actually provide all that much value in terms of displaying data and allowing you to say, okay, we're off in this area, and maybe these are the sorts of things we need to work on. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope everybody excels today, and we will begin questions and answers. So with that, okay. Wow, you didn't leave me, Linda, thank you. And Sage, you're probably playing Bubble Witch, but that's okay. I'm gonna push stop on the recording.